Okay. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Tony. And I'd like also to thank ACCESS.SPACE for organizing this panel. One important thing, a warm welcome to our panelists. Just to recall that this panel is called Sustainable and Equitable Access to Orbit Resources. And the general trust for the expert panelists would be, in fact, to inspire you, the audience, with the issue and challenges that you're all facing today at national and or international level for accessing the orbit resource for your satellite system project, whatever other project, big, small, CubeSat, near the Earth, beyond the universe. And with orbit resources, in fact, we mean spectrum, and we mean also orbits. And I'll invite all panelists also to provide any ideas and thoughts, even iconoclastic ones, you wish the community to consider in the coming years to overcome any what you feel could be as remaining existing rules or regulations or practice that you feel prevent an equitable and sustainable access to these orbit resources. Without further delay, and because time is pressing, I won't present in detail our panelists, our very expert panelists, but invite you all to consult the conference website for that purpose, where you will see how lucky we are to have such expert with us today. In fact, for this panel, we'll begin the presentation with Alexandre Vallet, which is Mr. Satellite at the Radio Communication Bureau of the ITU. And just, it's a message also for all panelists. I'll invite you all to give your maximum 5-minute pitch. And it's true for you, Alexandre, and also for all other panelists. And for you, Alexandre, it will be on this issue of orbit spectrum access, as seen from the international regulators. Then we'll hear Alexandre Kholod, which is head of international frequency planning at the Swiss Federal Office of Communications, and he will talk about the national and regional challenges. Then Yulia Koulikova from Astrocast, the IoT network for the planet. I just took that from the Astrocast website. We'll follow to share her experience and possible difficulty as a newcomer. And then we'll move a little from orbit, or at least we'll move a little from frequencies, spectrum, and goes also more on the orbit issue. And we'll explore then the sustainability challenges as seen by Philippe, Clerc, and particularly the debris issues. And at the end of all the pitch presentation, we'll end with Toby from Astrocale, just also the first private company with a vision to secure the safe and sustainable development of space. One more time, thanks to the website. We will bring views on sustainability in practices. So after the presentations, like all of the other panel, we'll have a 20-minute chat open for Q&A. So please bear with us. And Mr. Vallet, the floor is yours for the first presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yvon. And yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Alexandre Vallet. I'm the Chief of the Space Services Department here in ITU. I just wanted to start with a brief presentation of what ITU is doing in space. We are, of course, managing one of the international treaties that govern the use of resources in outer space, and this is the use of radio spectrum and associated orbit, and the treaty is called the Radio Regulations. But we are also, in fact, doing some other space activities, like we have a space track in the AI for Good Summit. We also use some satellite communications. We don't only regulate them, so we use satellite communications in initiatives to connect the unconnected or to provide emergency telecommunications after some disasters. With regard to the topic of today, sustainable and equitable access to orbital resources, I think I will go into 3 categories. The access to LEO, which is the main focus on the new space activities, I would say. And there I would like to emphasize the sustainable aspect of the access to LEO by the need to comply with international rules. And more precisely, I would put forward that new space company as well as regulators should view the radio regulations, this treaty, as a mean to get a supplementary assets for the project and not simply a set of constraints. So if you apply the radio regulations quite well, then at the end, you will get a set of frequency rights. You don't simply have to abide to a number of constraints. You get something in exchange, in reward, I would say, and there are a set of frequency rights that can help you to build the case for your project, especially in front of investors. So first things, view the radio regulations as a means, as a strategic asset. And the second aspect with regard to access to LEO is, however, do not forget the national component of licensing. It's good to comply with the radio regulations, but do not forget that the radio regulation is an international treaty that is translated in each national law. And it is important to check what your project needs in terms of national license. Depending on the project, you may need access to one country because you will simply need to download images from your Earth observation satellites into a single Earth station. So you need to worry about one licensing regime. But you may need to access a multiple number of countries because you want to provide a communication system. This has to be integrated in your business plan. The second aspect that I would like to touch upon is the equitable access to a particular orbit, that is the GSO. I know that this is not the primary focus of new space company, but now, in fact, with the advent of new technologies in satellites, there are now technological and regulatory opportunities for small GSOs, and these small GSOs can benefit to of using the holes that are left in the GSO and that are up to now considered as non-profitable because they are too small, either in terms of coverage or in terms of frequencies. But with the decrease of the cost of these small GSOs, then it becomes much more economical to get access to the GSO with these kind of technology. So this can promote also more equitable access to these resources, notably for countries that before were, I would say, on the verge of having a business plan for a national satellite. These new technologies could, in fact, create the compelling argument for closing the business case, the business plan. And I would like to conclude with other orbits that are less discussed in this kind of forum. The ITU does not only discuss or regulate the LEO and the GSO. In fact, we are responsible for all use of radio frequencies in outer space. So it includes MEO, it includes HEO, it includes also the moon. And we have received recently some application from companies wishing to get part of the new ways to the moon. It includes as well Mars, other celestial bodies, and even beyond the solar system. You may probably know that we still have in our database the frequencies for Voyager. So do not hesitate neither as the company or as regulators to think about this possible scientific mission and scientific exploration mission. They are, in fact, regulated, so they are not prohibited to be used. And with that, I would like to stop my presentation. Thank you,
Yvon. Thanks a lot, Alexandre. Well, you said that this access to orbit spectrum resources is really a strategic asset, and I agree with you. And as such, this strategic asset has to be managed in respect of the international rules and regulations. But I think that there are one thing also not to forget about the ultimate goal of all of those regulations, at least the IT ones, which are in fact to avoid harmful interference. And at some stage, we have not to forget the law of physics. But having said that, I'll pass right now. I'll thank you very much one more time, Alexandre, and I'll pass the floor to, well, another Alexandre Kholod from the Swiss Federation Office of Communication. Please, Alexandre the second, this is your turn.
Thank you, Yvon. I hope you can hear me. Could you please confirm?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. And I can see my presentations, and I hope all others can also see it. And I will start by thanking you, Yvon, for inviting me to join this panel. I'm glad to share my view as a regulator on the issue of spectrum and orbit resources for satellites. I enjoyed the intervention by Alexandre Vallet, giving us an overall picture of the ITU approach and also some peculiarities. And I can say that we regulators have developed this international framework, and we are part of it. And there are two issues in this respect: development of the framework and practical implementation of this framework. In view of the time I have for my introduction, I will only focus on the first issue, and it will be probably as a follow-up on what Alexandre has said. And I believe that the implementation issue will be touched upon by following speakers, also noting that we have our Swiss operator in this panel, namely Astrocast. And Alexandre referred to the radio regulations that are revised and amended by World Radiomedication conferences. I would like to develop a bit further on this, showing direct interest for regulators and also satellite operators for such international regulatory framework. Well, we are all aware that the spectrum and the geostationary orbits are limited natural resources. And the difficulties that we regulators are facing are that there are more and more demands for spectrum and orbits for different satellite applications. This allows me to compare the conference process with a train moving from one railway station to another. A train has a limited capacity, just like the radio spectrum. When the train stops at the station, some passengers get off, while some others get in. In general, the number of passengers getting on the train and leaving the train is more or less equal. Similar process happens at the conference. Some services and their application get access to the spectrum. Some others may need to leave it. However, contrary to the train passengers, there are more services and applications that are seeking to access the spectrum to come into the train than those that are willing to leave it. In addition, some passengers travel in the first class, where I'm from Switzerland, with a well-developed railway network. That's why I take this example. So some passengers travel in the first class, as some services use these frequencies on a primary basis with no or just few constraints. Some other services access the spectrum with some restrictions, including being, for example, designated as secondary services, like passengers traveling in the second class with less room. So the art of the conference of regulators taking part therein is to provide access to the spectrum and orbits for new service applications, but such that existing users can continue to access these natural resources with, as far as possible, no additional restrictions. Turning to more concrete example of the challenge that the regulators are facing as far as space is concerned, I take the agenda of the next conference. Well, I would like first to observe that satellite issues have always taken an important part in the conference discussions. The next conference in 2023 is not an exception. Among around 25 or so different items and topics, more than 1/3 are either explicitly or implicitly related to satellites. And we can broadly categorize them into 4 groups. Those that are related to the protection of existing satellite spectrum allocations, those that are aiming to find new additional spectrum for satellites. Then the third category are those that are seeking to increase the efficiency in the spectrum usage by satellites by allowing novel usages of the existing space locations. And the final category of items are those dealing with the regulatory procedures themselves. And there is indeed a big effort of all regulators around the world during the 3 years of preparation before the conference and during the 4 weeks of the conference. I put some pictures from the last conference in order to resolve all these different agenda items in relation to the space communications. However, the effort is certainly not in vain and is compensated, in my view, in full. In particular, the provisions of the radio regulations mentioned by Alexandre, which are revised or newly established by the conference, will indeed provide efficient and effective use of the spectrum and orbital resources. We as regulators are also responsible to guarantee our satellite operators recognition and protection of their space usages and their protection from interference, as was also mentioned by Yvon previously. And the radio regulations are, in our view, provide this sustainability. And finally, under this treaty, radio regulations, we can always claim our right to have equitable access to spectrum and satellite orbits. So I guess my 5 minutes that Yvon gave me or gave us are approaching the expiration now. So I stop for now and would be certainly happy to address any questions in relation to the approach taken by regulators with respect to this international framework. Thank you, Yvon.
Thanks a lot, Alexandre. Well, your 5 minutes, it's like the other Alexandre. It's quite okay, but seems to me not to be the exact Swiss time. But okay, I'll take it to the extent that Tony is not seeing anything behind us. It's okay. I like your analogy with Swiss trains. I will say they are not being on one time, always on time in Switzerland. And I hope that what you mean by that is that the international regulations embedded in international treaty, which are then taken into account by national laws, are really on time for any of the projects that we have in mind, particularly for this new space. But I think that we'll hear a little more about new space to a certain extent. And I'll give the floor to Yulia from Astrocast, and certainly will share with us her experience and maybe possible difficulties regarding access to the orbit spectrum whenever you're a newcomer and with a new type of service, but a very interesting one and promising one. Please, Yulia, the floor is yours.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope you can hear me well. So
yes, it's okay. We hear you well.
So I'll try to share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Okay. Can you see it? Great. Hello? Okay, I'm not sure I'm being heard, but hopefully yes. So,
well, just Yulia, you heard, and we've got your presentation on the screen, at least on mine. So hopefully everything is working.
So I'm one of the Swiss representative in this very Swiss-centric panel, as far as I can see. So I'll try to be on time as well, and I will not present very extensively Astrocast because tomorrow you will hear Laurent Vieira-Demelo, who is going to present Astrocast in more details during a panel on IoT. So to be very, very brief, to just give you an idea of who we are a small company, established in Switzerland near Lausanne, and we provide IoT based on satellites. We're trying to be global, so we're working on it, and Laurent will speak more about our solutions tomorrow. So when we were preparing this panel with our spectrum management team, we were sort of asking ourselves what exactly is equitable and sustainable access to the orbital resources for us, and where do we encounter issues, and what can we talk about? Because, well, the regulations and the regulatory view of the administrations have been extensively presented. What is our challenge? So we, being very young company, young not only in terms of existence, but also young in terms of staff, so of people who are actually working for Astrocast, we have a different, I think, view on how the whole system works, and we have a view of a younger generation, if I may say so. So the company starts as a spin-off of EPFL University project and grows progressively into a full operator. And when the engineers come up with a new technology, as much as they need to assess the impact of the regulations and challenges that they may encounter in the course of the lifetime of their business, it's not exactly the first thing that they think about. So they come up with a technology, they consider it great, and then they discover the world of the regulatory processes, and sometimes it's a difficult discovery, because they find out that it's full of obstacles and procedural difficulties, and it is difficult to understand. So a young company with millennials in it, what would they do? They would go on Google and try to find how this works, how the regulation works, how the process works, and they would discover the presentations of, for example, filing procedure that would look at least cumbersome. Let's put it that way. So the startup will try to make sense of it, and they will unavoidably stumble upon the fact that they will need to hire somebody who understands the regulation, who understands the process, and this clearly represents a substantive cost, because people who are specialized in ITU regulations and in procedural matters do cost a lot, and they are not that many. And if you are in Switzerland like we are, and we are lucky to be here, you would find people who are competent, but it's not always the case if you're a startup in a different country. So then, after you understand how it works, you need to cooperate with an administration that would back you in your filing process. So again, we were lucky to be in Switzerland because we have Ofcom, who is a functional and competent administration, and was very helpful in this process for us. And for them, it was also one of the first experiences, but they were ready to go on this learning curve together with Astrocast. But again, that may not be the case for everyone, and some administrations may not have sufficient staff, or may not have sufficient knowledge of how to follow the procedures in front of the ITU. And therefore, they cannot obviously help the young companies like ourselves. So then, once you go through the whole process and your filing is done and notification is done and everyone is happy, you have to then hire staff who will stay on top of the protection that you have to ensure. So we don't come, if I may say, with armed in the same way as the established operators. So we cannot really speak about equitable access to the orbital resources if we're talking about young innovative companies who do not obviously have long experience in this sector. So we have a wish list of things that we would like to ask from the ITU, namely in facilitating the comprehension of the process, make something that would be relatively helpful and simple for us to understand. And we would like also to attract your attention that some of the database that we are using should be liberated from bugs and maybe make a little bit more automatic. And that would be something that already would help a lot the young companies like ourselves, and hopefully speed up the access to the orbital resource and make it more equitable. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yulia. Well, suddenly I feel that my gray hair was was really not. It was not the place to be today. But you talk so much about young generations. That's great, and I like that. But you said also that regulation, generally speaking, looks cumbersome, and but I think it grew. But on one hand, you should take also into account that when you've done your investment, you find your investment, you build your satellite, you launch your satellite, you're happy, and then no service because of interference. Then sometime discussion before launching all of those and through some regulations could help. The ideal way of having a simpler regulations, I would say simpler is not really better, but smarter certainly. And I agree with you, we should have a smarter regulation. And I will let Alexandre Vallet with the bugs in any of the program, but thanks a lot. And we'll have some opportunity to talk during the chat at the end. Well, right now we'll move a little from this orbit spectrum aspects to the one very important aspect about sustainability, and which is to see with the debris. And before saying anything, I'd like to give the floor to where I am. Yes, to Philippe Clerc, and that he present to us in a way the challenge with the debris, particularly now that we have a multitude of non-GSO systems which are launched, and for some of them with thousands or tens of thousands of satellites. So Toby, I know that you don't have any presentation, so we should not face any of those technical Zoom or whatever problem. So thanks a lot to be there with us, Toby. And in fact, you should have come after Philippe, that would have presented roughly the debris challenge or the debris generally speaking issues. However, Astrocale is beyond the debris. There are also some other issues, etc. But I'll let you have your 5 minutes like others. The floor is yours, Toby.
Thank you very much, Yvon. So yeah, I haven't got any slides, so I'm just going to talk for a little bit. So you have to put up with my face, I'm afraid. So anyway, so my name's Toby Harris, head of SSA at Astroscale. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this panel. So for those of you who don't know, Astroscale is a global commercial venture. It's based in Japan, the UK, US, and Israel, with a vision of securing safe and sustainable development of space for the benefit of future generations. And our mission is basically to develop new technologies, advance business cases, and inform international policies that can help reduce orbital debris and support long-term sustainable use of space. Now, as many of you no doubt have seen, we've had a recent successful launch of our LCD spacecraft. This is a significant step for us to be able to prove end-to-end debris removal technologies, including developing capabilities to dispose of failed satellites, so end-of-life technologies, and also actively remove space debris, so active debris removal or ADR technologies. And we hope to build upon the success of these missions in developing our upcoming multi-client LSAT-M mission in the future. So as well as that, we're also developing our Lexi mission, which is aimed at life extension of spacecraft in geosynchronous orbit, as well as expanding our use of in-situ space situational awareness through our upcoming ADRAS-J mission to inspect a defunct LEO rocket body. And building capabilities to help ensure sustainable access to space in the future is core to our work. However, as a small spacecraft operator, we're also very conscious of the space safety issues present in the orbital environment today. So space becomes more congested and contested in its use, as access becomes more affordable, and as larger systems of satellites become more commonplace, coordination between operators is essential to ensure an equitable use of sought-after orbits. Key to this is a robust, established communication route between organizations, supported by effective and responsive space situational awareness or space surveillance and tracking. And with this in place, access to these congested orbits by both operators of single spacecraft as well as those operating large constellations becomes far more manageable. I think whilst this can be performed from an operator-to-operator basis, it's not always the most robust, reliable, or well-defined method. And it should really be a key driver on how any future space traffic management approach should operate. And so whilst coordination is essential, we also know that no spacecraft is 100% reliable, that the number of larger space debris and non-functioning objects is still increasing, and the risk of a collision is getting larger. It will take just one collision with a large object to create thousands of fragments, most of which can't be tracked, which can damage, disable, or destroy satellites. And whilst removing of these satellites through end-of-life or ADR missions in the future is absolutely essential, it's just as important to minimize the number and the risk of these objects in the first place. Operators and regulars need to take a responsible and equitable view on the risk of operating in space. A key example of this is the need to aggregate risk of collision when authorizing and supervising large systems of satellites. And to this end, we propose the need to quantify the total risk of all maneuverable satellites in the system, cap the aggregate risk of failed satellites in the system, monitor the aggregate risk of systems through suitable monitoring or health checks, and enforce these measures through a consistent approach under national regulators. And we think a common sense safety approach should be undertaken by all spacecraft operators, minimizing disposal times to no more than 5 years, ensuring maneuverability at higher altitudes, considering backup disposal options if the primary approach doesn't work, and acting responsibly in both the design of spacecraft and the management and operation of them. And ultimately, risks to operations will eventually become more transparent, controllable, and limited, ensuring to help that growth can continue unimpeded. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, thanks a lot, Toby. I have interesting questions, but I will wait for the chat at the end. And maybe right now, Philippe, you're with us and with your presentation. So please, Philippe, you have the floor.
You have my presentation?
Yes, everything is okay.
So first page, could you, I have no control on the presentation. Is it correct?
I have control, Philippe. Just tell me what you want to do. I have the control.
Could you go to the second page, please? So my contribution is to deals with space law regarding space orbit sustainability with regard to space debris mitigations, rules, or guidelines. Firstly, I will recall on which matters space law is currently applicable and enforceable, and what are its solutions regarding to our topic. Secondly, I will focus on new challenges regarding space traffic management and active debris removal services. And finally, I will conclude with some discussion to promote a development of space law to serve the economic interests while preserving space environment and the international security. So let's remain in this page 2. Regarding the existing law, we have to recall that space law as such only applies to operations affecting space vehicles, namely launch services, station keeping services, and return to Earth of vehicles, space vehicles. But it does not cover the payload activities. That means it does not cover the services performed with the satellite. The law governing such services are, I would say, information law in the broad sense, telecommunication, observation, localization, navigation, appropriation, or dissemination of data. And also, it has been mentioned before, also radio spectrum rules regarding the access of such capacity to operate the payload, the mission, and the satellites also. Okay, so it's important to mention that because you probably know that space law is a separate branch and has not so much interface with radio spectrum access and use. Regarding space law solution, to summarize, because as you know, it's more it's very detailed. Space law is derived from the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and such treaties, and we have appended treaties, registration treaty agreement, the liability agreement, but the core law is the 1967 treaty, which is translated into national regulation, national legislation, but also regulations or just public procurement contracts. And as a solution, to summarize, the liability, first of all, the regime is freedom of operation, but subject to national and national authorization and control. And this control is being implemented through the national space law. But the solution, the liability burden for damage caused to third party by space debris is to be shared, namely is borne by the state, but is to be shared with the private operator and its insurance company, if there is one. But national law provides from some limitation of liability. Limitations on the amount. This liability indemnification can be capped at 60 million euro, but also limitation in time, in duration. And for the French space law, it's after 1 year of operation, the liability burden returns to the state and is not any longer borne by the private operator. And associated to such legislation, we have technical regulation, but not in any country. We have that in France, in US legislation. That means beyond the liability burden, which is borne by the operator, the space operator, the space, and which has to be insured and supported by the government warranty, states require the compliance with technical regulation on systems and procedure. And this technical regulation are based from international guidelines, space debris mitigation guidelines of EADC or ISO, but it has been a translation from non-binding instruments to enforceable instruments through the law, but not any legislation. Now, considering the new space challenges, such as we have to focus on space traffic management issues and associated and how to facilitate associated services on space situational awareness. And to achieve such objective of facilitation, we have to agree. That means states, but also the private sectors among them have to agree on priority rules between different systems, between defense and civil. Who has the right to go first? Who has to be protected first? The privileged access on traffic, and also between commercial and public use, and between all satellites and new satellites. Priority to what? Or between control satellites or not control. As you know, CubeSat are not controlled. And beyond, we have to ensure coherence with ITU, International Civil Aviation Organization rules, or World Trade Organization rule, European rules, and so on. And we have also to have a common definition of fault regime in orbit, because there is a vacuum in the current Outer Space Treaty or the Liability Convention on who is responsible, who is faulty when there is a damage caused to another one in orbit. Not for damage caused to on the ground, it is all the launching state, but in orbit, it's not so easy to have a common understanding, and it's not good for business. About now a solution, technical solution of active debris removal. You have heard about that. Active debris removal is a physical operation between two spacecraft, different spacecraft. One is a space tug, and the other is a space object to be or a future debris to be removed or to be refueled and so on. And this operation, it can be a business operation, but also contribute to security and restoration of the orbit. And main legal issues to consider are to match different national legislation, because we have two space objects, you have two licenses, and you have to combine them together. And so this harmonization is not so easy, and we have to invent also derived from solution a law for rescue, to make sure that the one who is performing the service of rescue will be indemnified by the one who have the benefit of this service. And we have many technical legal tools based on basic law, négociam gestio, unjust enrichment, good Samaritan law, presumed trust, that could be translated into space law to allow the development of such services of active debris removal. Now, to conclude,
quickly,
just for
please.
feed for thoughts, to ACCESS, first to harmonize national space legislation and technical regulation, but I don't think that we could reach such goal on top-down approach or through the UN COPIOS multilateral approach, because it is so difficult to change anything existing. So the idea is to complete a solution and to try to, based on a mutual recognition mechanism inspired from the one of OECD or ICO, Standard of Common Practice, standard practice, between a system of mutual recognition instead of top-down system, we could have a solution of harmonization of national space law. And we have the other one challenge is to complete the traditional space law to integrate economic law, in particular to regulate and to harmonize state aids and guarantees, because and to make sure that to have fair competition, to have a common contract law, to have a common quasi-contract law for rescue, and this in coherence with ITU, WTU, and so on, and also existing mechanism. And this call for international forum, national forum, of course, but I would say private public forum to discuss such solution. Thank you. Sorry for being long.
Thanks a lot, Philippe. Well, I found that the 5 French minutes seems to be different from the 5 Swiss minutes, but okay. Having said that, that will in fact give less time for the chat. And so hopefully you can all be on screen. Certainly open your mic when you will want to respond. Because of the very short time that we have for the chat, in fact, well, I'll go with two issues. Then I'll let all of you talking about, and if there is other issues, and I will invite Tony also, because of his experience in all of this domain, to come with us. If you have any questions, also to come. My 2 questions, firstly and quite quickly. The first one is to both Alexandres, and in fact it's in Yulia's. It's in response to Yulia's comments, and I would say, what do you respond, both Alexandre, to Yulia's views that the current international regulations and to a certain extent national one are cumbersome? what would be required to have some equitable access to all in space, big guys with big pockets, small guys with a big pocket, but small guys also with a smaller pocket, and so from an international framework. And the second question that I would have will be more related to space debris. I really like all of those things and buzz that we have right now under space debris. But and I'll ask my questions like that: is the space debris problems wishful thinkings, where at some stage all GSO and in particular non-GSO company will swear by clicking a checkbox on a file or via a press statement that we will follow the agreed guidelines. But is it enough to avoid tomorrow's Kessler syndrome? And do we need at this stage, or do we have at this stage some standard methodology to quantify the space debris risk? And that through this quantification is possible, it will respond to the meaning of equitable access, and also that could, through those, in a way, quantifications that could give some binding responsibility on any new space projects beyond following some guidelines. So those are in fact some of the issues that I would like you to have discussion on. If there is any other questions to Q&A, please feel free to respond. Tony, also, if you want to intervene. I know that we don't have so much time, and I think that everybody would be would like, although it's virtual, to be on time for the drink, for the virtual drink. And I think that we have just 10 minutes. So I open the floor. Maybe firstly to both Alexandre in response to Yulia. And if Yulia, you want to intervene on those responses, please be free. Who would like to begin with?
Well, I can. Well, this is true in a way that the radio regulations have been built initially, historically, for first for the GSO satellites, then for the big non-GSO players or the space agencies, so very big players. So in the sense, you can see some remnants of it in it. The issue then is more, in my view, also that it really depends whether you want to launch, I would say, a prototype satellite, for which I tend to agree that the current regulations are quite long or quite difficult to put in place, or if you really want to enter into a business. If you want to enter into business in using space, you need at a certain point in time to understand that there is no stational sovereignty in space. And therefore, you are going into an area where you can't rely on states. So indeed, there is a need to have an international mechanism. And in a way, yes, international mechanisms takes time because you have to consult with the others and so on. What is possible is we can probably look at better tools to handle this mechanism. We are trying to do so, but of course we are operating within the framework of a treaty that change only for every 4 years and that have very fundamental principles. One other thing that I would like to mention is that one thing that may be a little bit complicated is that the treaty is changed by changing small deltas of the treaties. And we never really look at keeping the overall consistency or the overall coherence of the various provisions. So what you have now is a document that is extremely difficult to read, even for experts like me, because there are, I would say, added layers of delta modifications, instead of having a kind of overall look at the consistency and coherence of the provisions. That may be something that will be needed in the following years. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alexandre. Well, I hope that you don't want to recreate a kind of voluntary group of experts like 20 years ago, just to review everything. And hopefully, you are talking also about a certain number of layers. I think that beyond layers, there are also lawyers coming to to the overall aspect. But okay, Alexandre. Well, the other Alexandre, do you want just to say one word in addition to what Alexandre from ITU said about the fact that the regulation could be cumbersome? And I'm sure that the Swiss rules are as simple as it could be, taking into account the cumbersome radio regs. Please, Alexandre.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know we have some pressure of the time, and Alexandre said a lot. You even complimented, so I don't have to say a lot. I just can first say I understood Yulia costed a lot to Astrocast. She said this, that regulated specialists cost a lot. And second message that they conveyed, of course, this regulator is very good, was very helpful to Astrocast. And I can confirm that we have rather simple rules for the time being. Well, we don't have space law yet. We are considering to develop one. So probably in this case, we are attractive or not, or is it attractive or not? But how we can help as regulator to small companies like Astrocast and others. I think Alexandre mentioned two different categories, the commercial or business, or some precursor or test satellites. And here I would like just to know that we can also help as regulators for these precursor missions, not only for the commercial ones, but for precursor. We can make some tests in the so-called amateur satellite bands. We've got already agreement with our amateur society in Switzerland and with the International Amateur Union. So we have already experience with that. And second, the previous conference established the rules to facilitate coordination for so-called short mission of satellites. And I think this is also very helpful for the newcomers to test their technical abilities to operate the network. And of course, when we come to the commercial phase, there I think we should follow the full, complete regulatory framework, because we speak about sustainability of our business. We want that our network is protected, recognized and protected. And then really we should go through the whole creation process. We cannot avoid, we cannot go up, down, we should go through it. But then we are sure that we are a legal player on the market. And for us regulators, we don't distinguish between big players or small players. All of them are clients of the regulator, and we really try to meet the requirements of the utmost. I don't know even whether I was short enough, but you've got just 2 minutes. Sorry for that.
You were long enough. So I would say, okay, before going to the debris, generally speaking, Yulia, you have a chance to say that.
We only have 1 minute left, Yvon.
Oh,
so maybe,
1 minute left.
We should go to the debris okay. Question quickly, please.
Okay, so the debris questions. And well, firstly, do you think we can go through kind of a recognized quantification of space debris? And then related to that, that could be through this quantification, then you can have some binding responsibility on any new space project vis-a-vis these quantifications beyond the fact that right now it's only guideline. Well, maybe Philippe and then Toby. And well, I would say you have 30 seconds. So I would say we're no more in Switzerland there. So you have 1 and 1 minute, and then you will be able to drink virtual drinks. Please, Philippe.
Very quickly.
Yes, your mic is mute, Philippe.
Yeah, mic is off, Philippe. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, very quickly. Space debris assessment is a matter of technical regulation, and it does not entail as such a liability. The liability is in case of damage caused to a collision caused to another one. So there is no, you have to comply with your license, but I don't know, it depends of the country, but just retain that at the end, it's a matter of liability in case of collision only.
I'm going to have to stop here, unfortunately.
No, I want Toby to say one thing about it.
Yeah,
please.
Go ahead, please. We have to stop now.
Okay, yeah, very briefly, just in terms of quantifying the risk of space debris. I mean, there's a lot of work recently gone on such things as the space sustainability rating and other carrying capacity metrics and indices, which I think are quite important when we're talking about equitable access into space. And we just have to be careful in how we use these indices. They're obviously very good at trying to construe a very complex topic into one single number, and it's very helpful for a regulator to use that number to determine what the risk of emission is and quantifying that risk of space debris. But I think you have to be careful by using that single number, which could oversimplify the impact of emission, underplay the unknowns, or practice the uncertainty of the method, as well as enable a certain amount of gaming by tuning certain inputs into a space sustainability model. So I think it would be helpful to quantify the risk of space debris in that matter, but you just have to be careful how they're used, particularly by a regulator.
If I may end it here, Yvon, I will invite you all in a new session of regulatory and space law debris and so on. Soon, we'll do a webinar, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours discussion. That'd be actually much better than just a single hour. We just actually had a flavor of the problems and the issues. I invite you to come to the IoT session tomorrow morning, where we're going to have the UAE administration who's going to actually give us some flavor on licensing for IoT satellite systems and space systems from the perspective of the UAE regulator. So I'm going to have to end it here. We're going to move to the drink and chat session. You all have received a link and also ID and password to come into the drink session. Everyone will go into a room. I will actually, after you see me, then I will put you in a room randomly, unfortunately, because there's about 100 people here. So please bear with us, and then we'll start tomorrow 8 o'clock with the Australian Space Agency to do a keynote. All right.
Okay, just to say thanks to all panelists, please. we haven't time. Thanks for all panelists and the interesting discussion we have had.
Thank you.
Right now.